And it's strange, really, because in those days, when I was a kid, there was very few bird watchers of any sort about. And certainly not people in the working class like I was. And none of my people were interested in birds to start me off. It just came quite normally and accidentally and grew as I grew, you know.
That goes mostly for the Exmouth in the winter, see? But I always keep my winkles on. And if the river was full of salmon, I'd stay home a couple of days to get my winkles to sign away, because you can't let people down, can you?
So one of these gentlemen said to the head pilot, "That youngster there looks like my son." So the head pilot said to him, "Oh, what's your son?" We said, "He's here, a soldier wounded, and he's called Dido." Well, I've had that name ever since.
This is the estuary of the River Exe in Devon. A lot of people see it every year because railway lines run down both sides of it, from Exeter to Exmouth on the east bank, and the main line to the west down through Dawlish all the way to Penzance on the other. I'm at one of the remoter spots. It's called Turf. If you want to visit this pub here, you've either got to come on foot or else you've got to take a boat up the river, because there's no way of getting a car here. I suppose to most of the people who pass by in the trains, the estuary is just an expanse of water and mostly mud when the tide's out. It's very much more than that to people such as Tom Stamp. He's one of the men who still earns a living from the estuary by shellfish and by salmon mostly. He knows every creek and he knows every little mud bank. Or Dick Adams. Dick's a gardener. He's also a great lover of birds, and this is a very good place for him to live because the bird life of the estuary is very rich. I suppose he doesn't really know every single separate bird in the whole estuary, but when you talk to him, you do sometimes get that impression. Or Dido Bradford. Dido's a pilot. He brings the ships down from Exeter to Turf, down the canal. It's one of the oldest canals in England, and then from here down the estuary to Exmouth and the sea. That nickname, Dido, acquired when he was a boy just because he happened to look like somebody else's son, has stuck to him all his life. You only have to say Dido in any house in Lympstone, say, and they know who you mean. On the starboard beam is Star Cross. They know him there too. Going downriver beyond Star Cross, Dido has to steer clear of the big sandbank that stretches out into the estuary, Dawlish Warren. This is one of the places where at high tide the birds congregate, and where you'll often find Dick Adams. In the summer, holidaymakers will crowd the Warren. But now, in January, at the beginning of the year, Dick is alone with his old friends, the waders, the oyster catchers, and all the rest. Even as a boy on the farm, he'd like to watch the birds, though working 7 days a week, he didn't have many opportunities. Later, when he started gardening, he had more free time, and every spare moment was spent wandering on the estuary flats, finding his own way around.
It's the best estuary in the country because it's the only one really that I can watch. And in my hobby as bird watcher, there is certainly one of the best estuaries for birds that you can come across at all. A great variety. Maybe not the numbers of some birds, whereas some in other estuaries you might get 10 times more. But we have got the variety here.
Like dunlin. And redshank. And green plover. Upriver at Lympstone, Tom Stamp goes out to his boat. He's limping because of a cycling accident when he was a boy. In those days, he was known as Little Snips because his father was a tailor cum barber. And Snips he still is, though he's never been anything but a fisherman. He begins mussling in the autumn and carries on throughout the winter, subject to the hazards of the weather, until the early spring.
It starts around in September, and then the mussels will stay good till you can near enough say about the 14th of March. Mussels will be good, and as long as the water stays dirty, there's enough rainwater for to keep the water, you know, just dirty. They'll keep good, but you only want to get rid of our frosts, of a nap tide, and the water gets as clear as gin, and a bright blue sky, Mediterranean sky, and the sunshine down through, and they'll shoot in 24 hours.
Companions of Snips as he goes about his mussling are the herons. They're at Powderham on the west bank. They're said to have been there even longer than the Courtenays, the family of the Earls of Devon. And the Courtenays at Powderham go back to 1390. The herons nest early, and the deer, the Powderham deer, you often see them from the train, they're also beginning to realise it's nearly spring. Back at Lympstone, Dick Adams is working, keeping a watchful eye on the estuary, and especially his beloved Warren, which is threatened by erosion. In the meantime, the Warren provides, among other things, a good golf course. The course is the only known place in Britain where the Warren crocus grows, and the members are rather proud of it. A little pale blue flower, about the size of a sixpence. It blooms every April. Another sign of the advancing year is that the birds are changing their plumage. The bar-tailed godwit changes from drab grey to brick red. The grey plover becomes a spangled black and white on top, jet black below. The dunlin turns black and gold. For Snips, it's the salmon season. It doesn't last long, and you can't afford to shirk any labour or waste any time within the legal limits.
You can start before 6 o'clock Monday morning, and you've got to finish up by 6 o'clock Saturday morning, you see. So that gives from Saturday morning 6 till Monday morning 6, you see, if you go out down William Fortune, see. Of course, it's different now. You've got this your lighter net. When used to be cotton, of course, it would be like a blanket, you see. But now that with this your curling, well, it's a different thing altogether than used to be, see.
It still isn't exactly child's play. Though I dare say it seems like that to the herons, those natural fishermen who watch all the effort aloofly from a couple of 100 yards away. The young have hatched. Out go the eggshells from the nest. We're well into spring. For Dick Adams, back at Turf, where the canal begins, at the estuary's heart, for Dick, it's a good time and place to look for shelduck.
There's shelduck at turf whatever the time of year, as long as there's shelduck on the estuary at all. And in the summer's evening, when the tide is rising, one can sit on the shore at turf and watch these magnificent birds coming from different parts of the estuary in twos and threes and small parties, and gathering off the shore and mingling with a lot of mallard, which also come to that part at high tide. At this spot too is the very place where you look for the young shelduck, when they're small, downy little things just hatched, and they're traveling around close behind their parents' tail until they get a little more independent.
The end of Dick's day. The beginning of Dido's. Dido lives at Exmouth. Exmouth was the first town in Devon to become a holiday centre, but long before it was a holiday centre, it was a port, and pilots such as Dido were needed to take the ships through the banks and shallows to Exeter. A Bishop of Exeter once observed, Exmouth is a good place to look from. Dido is a man who has always lived, in two senses, by the sea.
I suppose I started at the age of, since I left school at 13, and I started herring fishing. 4 men to the crew. When I carried on that job till I was about 15, then I worked for the dock company here. Then I stayed with them till I was 29. But when after I finished with that, I decided to go in for a pilot. So I had to go through my exams, and I passed in 1937. Well, my first trip then was Exeter. And it was even strange going up there, you know, your first trip, you get a bit nervous like. But then after about a dozen trips, you got it weighed off.
In places, the estuary channel is 15 feet deep. In other places, it's only 9, and these ships draw 9 feet. You can only do it at high water. Most of Dido's work takes him up the canal, which runs off to the left there at Turf. But on this trip, he's staying on the river, bound for Topsom. Topsom is a town full of history, but even more than with Exmouth, its glory as a port has departed. First, the great wool trade declined. Then the estuary became too shallow for the coal and grain ships, and now it's mostly lager and timber. Cargoes of one sort and another have been landed here since Roman times. Among the reminders of past days is the centrepiece of the old scales used for quayside sails, known as the King's Beam. Some of the sail lofts have been converted to houses. The iron buckets on the roof of this one are said to have been put up by an owner who hoped to persuade storks to nest on them. He brought the storks from Holland, but they wouldn't stay. The gabled cottages and warehouses along the waterfront go back to the prosperous 17th and 18th centuries. Some of the houses are Dutch, not only in style, but materials. The stone was brought back as ballast in ships trading with the Netherlands. Above Topsom, in the 13th century, the Countess of Devon built a weir across the river at the place still known as Countess Weir. Later, more weirs were built. The idea was that goods for Exeter would have to unload at Topsom, where they were liable to pay duty to the Earls of Devon. Naturally, the citizens of Exeter objected, and to bypass the weirs, they built the canal. It was opened in 1566, probably the first in England to use locks. Although it's been extended and enlarged, it's never been any too big for its job. Turf lock is 120 feet long, with 25 feet beam and 10 feet draft. The pilot, who is paid according to the size of the ship, really earns his money at places such as this. It must have been even more difficult in the days of sail, when ships often preferred not to try the canal at all. They unloaded into barges at the estuary mouth, and the bargemen, the famous lumpers of Exmouth and Topsom, took them up to Exeter. They were Dido's forerunners, you might say. One way or another, for more than 400 years, ships have made their way up the canal to Exeter, the county town, though as a port, that too is only a shadow of the place it was in the heyday of the wool trade. The end of Dido's day. Back at Lympstone, the end of the day for Snips as well. There cannot be many more attractive stretches of railway in the country than the main line west between Exeter and Newton Abbot. It was here that Brunel, who built the line, made his experiment in atmospheric propulsion, railways worked by air pressure on roughly the same system as the pneumatic tube. The method required pumping stations placed at intervals along the line, and at Star Cross, the pumping station still stands, one of the estuary's most prominent landmarks. It was a wonderfully clean and quiet system for an early railway, and it might have worked well with a little more luck and a little less greed for quick returns. Perhaps the loveliest time of the year on the Exe estuary is early June, in the fullness of spring. At such a time, George Gissing used to sit on the little terrace in Topsom churchyard. I have, he wrote, a great liking for Topsom, and that churchyard, overlooking what is not quite sea, yet more than river, is one of the most restful spots I know. Dick Adams is watching the shell duck. A good place to work. A good place to laze. A good place to live. Then suddenly it's summer. Burney, here in 1791, was shocked to see some women with feet and legs entirely naked, straw bonnets of uncouth shapes tied on their heads, strolling along with wide, mannish strides.
Eyes down in your first number. On the red by itself.
Over the water, Exmouth also does a good holiday trade, though perhaps it considers itself a little more genteel than Dawlish Warren. The two sides don't have very much contact, though there is a ferry from Starcross to Exmouth, as there has been since the 12th century. There used to be a big traffic in rowing boats, which declined as the Warren began to develop its own resources for amusement. Dido had a rowing boat in the old days.
I used to be down here, especially myself with the other two boatmen, because we used to look after the houses over there. Well, I used to start 6 in the mornings and sometimes at it all night, ferrying the people across. Because there was no amusement over there, they either had to come to Exmouth or Torquay to a dance, and they'd come back at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I've had to row them over. On one occasion, we waited for some people to go across. And I took the ladies first, 7 ladies. And as I was halfway across the stream, these ladies were saying to me, "Is your boat leaking?" I said, "No, shouldn't be." It is because it's coming farther up our shoes. Well, you know, I just got to the Warren when she would have sung. Somebody took the cork in my boat during the night, and I didn't know it, you know.
Snips, in the summer, carries on with his ordinary work, though he's always ready to give a visitor a hand.
I never plays for hire. I've never asked, I've had a boat all my life, and I've never asked anybody if they'd like to go out in a boat. If anybody comes to me and says, well, will he take us out? If it's convenient, I do that. And I never charges them nothing. So the crowd come here once, they said, will you take us to Snips? Yes. I said, well, if once they pay him, I said, we'll charge. I said, I ain't going to charge you naught, but you bear the beer I drinks. Well, of course, as years ago, and when come home, like they I suppose they must have had a reckoning up coming home long. They said, the next time you go, this will pay.
Dido lives in Camperdown Terrace, which is a good address for a seaman. In the summer, apart from his official duties, he sometimes fits in some yacht piloting. It's a busy time, but his wife helps, takes the messages, sees he gets his meals, generally keeps him organised.
Yes, Dido, I have a message from the Motor Yacht Felicity.
On the walls, the dashing young Dido. An award of the Royal National Lifeboat Institution for the preservation of life from shipwreck. Seems strange to read his real name. Dido receiving the award from the Duchess of Kent for saving 10 people from a cabin cruiser off Orcombe Point, Exmouth. He was in the lifeboat service for 33 years. On a summer's day, the estuary is always crowded, and there's frequently a sailing race on. The Starcross Yacht Club claims to be the oldest in Britain, but for part of its history it was absorbed in an Exmouth club, so the honour may be shared. What a lot of things there are around here that recall the distant past. The Warren Golf Club's not very old, but it does possess links in the original golfing sense, the sandy country that links land and water. In July, the Sandwich terns, which have been away breeding, bring their offspring back to the Warren. The young ones have brown, speckled upper plumage and rather paler caps. Then there are the common terns. They come in great numbers, sometimes as many as 2,000 in a flock, though numbers have declined in recent years. Generally, however, there's no sign that the birds are leaving the estuary, despite the summer invasion.
There's far more disturbance now than there used to be. When I was a young chap, we could go out bird watching, not even see another bird watcher. But now there's not only other bird watchers, but all kinds of people walking by. And of course there's much more boating and fishing, that sort of thing going on. But apart from that, the birds are still coming. They come just like they used to. But they get shifted a bit more.
The birds come just like they used to, but they do get shifted about more. At any time of the year, when he has the chance, Snips will be busy with his winkles. He doesn't, of course, work regular hours. His day is governed by the tides, so that sometimes he has to start very early in the morning. He collects small winkles from all over the place and puts them down on his own patch. Not that he owns it, but he knows it to be particularly favourable ground for winkles, and he leaves them there to fatten until they've grown big enough for market.
Well, all depends where you throw them. Well, you can say 12, 18 months takes, because some of them are no bigger than pean's head because you pick it all up together, see?
This is something he can keep going all the time. The winkle is a very consistent performer. But there are still hazards. A gale of wind can sweep the crop out to sea. Crabs like eating shellfish. Birds like eating shellfish. The oyster catcher, Snips calls it without affection, the magpie curlew and sometimes the wrinkle snatcher, the oyster catcher is a particular enemy. Fortunately for the shellfish, they're not the only diet available to the birds. The mud and sand of the estuary are full of life and provide a useful field of study for zoological students at Exeter University.
The substrate is really quite muddy.
This expedition is led by Ian Lynn, lecturer in zoology.
Are specialised for this particular kind of habitat, and there's relatively few species, but they may exist in considerable numbers. Now, one of the animals you'll see is Strobicularia, which is a little bivalve mollusk, which has very long siphons and feeds in an unusual manner by bringing its siphons out and actually sucking out the mud. Another thing you'll find is the little gastropod mollusk, Hydrobia, which makes burrows. They're sometimes in tremendous numbers, and if you look down at the pool there, you'll see a tremendous number of little holes, and these are the holes of Hydrobia.
Further out on the estuary, clear water and a sandy bottom are preferred by other species. Razor shells. And another thing for which the estuary is quite famous, cockles. Ragworms all over the place. Good fish bait. And so is this worm, the white cat, looking like a sort of sea centipede. Sand eels, very good to eat, I'm told, by us as well as the birds. They move so fast, the students have to look sharp to catch them. A small flounder, good food for the herons, perhaps, if they can find it. Just look at their camouflage. Autumn. Dawlish Warren, autumn is not quite the season of mists and mellow fruitfulness. But there's a more traditional autumn scene on the east bank. Even Exmouth Church almost looks distinguished. Work goes quietly on. There's a timber boat at Topson. Snips is thinking about his winkles again. What was sown a year and more before should now be ready for reaping. He calls the spot where they grow his Klondike.
Klondike. Well, it is like a bank, you see. You raise out these your wrinkles and you get some thick. And it looks all right when you brings home half a pint load, but then 'tis yours if you end up picking them that day. If the magpie curlews, well, they eat a lot of them, you see, and if the crabs don't eat them, or a gale of wind don't come along and disturb it, you see, well, you can go and pick up a couple of pound when you mean to, you see. It only like going to the bank because you put them there for a rainy day, you see. Well, take right through the year, 52 weeks. Well, you can average 300 weight a week, see? That goes right through the year. There's a lot of wrinkles to pick up with one pair of hands, isn't it?
And they all have to be graded and bagged and then dispatched up country where the football crowds will eat them. Perhaps there is some mellow fruitfulness about after all. Two men on the Exe have much to talk about. Dido is a good talker, but he'll never compete with Snips. I don't know who could.
There's rooks, them educated rooks, they call them. They that over Powderham side, over the Earl of Devon side, 'tis true, well, Dad will tell him, when it's very cold in the winter and everything's all breezed up, seagulls will do it and rooks will do it.
Yeah.
They'll go down the hard and they'll pick up a mussel, and they'll fly up 30, 40 foot.
And let them drop.
And let them drop. And they, their crows, will come out over Bunny.
Right.
And on the lane over there, because they're in a lot of metal between either Riverland or over on the main land, you know. And they'll take up 40 foot and out wide's the lane, rail, 3 inches.
That's about it.
And they'll have a bullseye every time.
Marvin, sure, they'll let
They
that
will
come down.
20 foot and it's blowing a gale of wind, and they got the elevation or what they calls it, and they'll drop them down every time. They never ever
You can see them coming in after him.
Yeah, they do.
Can I?
Yeah, they will.
Well, I remember what do you call it again? Collie. Over Starcross.
Yeah.
Was it just column catching once? Me and Purse. Collie was out there bare buff too in the month of March. Because you know, as you know, on his own.
Yeah.
As you know, you mean about 12 out of the water. I said the Purse was calling. Inch by inch. In about 12 out of the water. Put a stool in his dredge, as you know.
Yeah.
And I seen the ring of the dredge break service. And I reckon he'd been 3 parts of an hour trying to get an up. I said, the Purse, up and he lets go again in a minute. I said, come in. Hello. What time is that? Do you know, he let go again. He said, 3:30.
Well, there was some that was dressed up tiddly, and some that wasn't, you see. And of course, Sammy Shepherd, he was good schoolmaster, man, strict. And he used to, they that had it in him, like he'd open them along, see. And Dick Adams, he could put it down on paper better than what the cameras can take it today. Because I told you that he painted a bunch of grapes and they looked so real that you could go over. You wouldn't have to have too many points, like, but you think you'd pick one off the paper night and they were so real. He could do it. He was a good fella.
A third man on the Exe, something of a man apart, is at home with his wife, quietly drawing his Christmas cards. After railway trains and holiday makers, in recent years helicopters have been added to the list of disturbances by which the birds refuse to be put off. For at Lympstone there's a Royal Marines barracks, and there are regular commando training exercises on the foreshore. Battle is not new to the estuary. In the Civil War, the Earl of Warwick mounted an unsuccessful amphibious operation trying to raise the siege of Exeter. The Widgeon were there long before Warwick. Just as long after the Marines have gone, I dare say, the Brent geese will come each autumn to the same spots on the estuary as they do today. Dick is drawn out again to meet the ducks and geese. Every month he takes part in the national wildfowl count. There are many kinds of duck in the estuary, and perhaps the most attractive of them all are the widgeon. Thousands of them. And on a Sunday morning at Exmouth, when there aren't many people about and the Brent geese may come in, Dick will be waiting.
They vary from one year to another in numbers, but they have picked up in recent years, and we may get 100 or even more now. With them come their young birds, if they've had any, that is, because some years we don't get any at all. It all depends on the success or otherwise of the breeding season away in the Arctic Circle. The young birds can be identified from the old birds at close range by the pale edges to some of the back feathers, this being plain grey in the old bird and with a white edge on the young bird. They feed on the weed which we call enteromorpha and another one which we call zostra or widgeon grass.
It's near Powderham on the west bank that one can often see the force of Dick's claim about the variety of the estuary's bird life. The waders, these are mainly black-tailed godwit. Lapwings. Greenshank. Roth. Oyster catches, Snips's pals, and a single avocet. Every bird watcher worth his salt needs to have seen an avocet. Winter is cold even in Devon, and some years it brings snow. Because snow is comparatively rare, it lends a fresh beauty to the estuary scene. On such a day as this, when even the redoubtable Snips stays indoors with his wife, in the year 1855, the devil paid a visit. Or so a lot of people concluded when they got up after a snowy night, for they found hoof prints of a kind never seen before or since. They were drawn and reported by careful observers at the time, a single line of hoof prints, each about 4 inches by 2 3/4 and 8 inches apart. When the prints came to an obstruction, a wall or a haystack, they went straight over the top. And the reports came from places so far apart that the very minimum covered in the night must have been 40 miles. If not the devil, a sea serpent, perhaps. It's no more absurd than some explanations that have been given. Whatever it was, it caused great alarm at the time. The only thing of which we can be sure is that the birds went on taking no notice. Turnstones, you can see how they got their name. Gulls sometimes find life a bit hard when the weather's bad, but these have found some starfish washed up by the storm. The crow is dropping a shellfish on the road, what Snips would call an educated crow. The cold weather brings in greater numbers of the diving ducks, goldeneye and red-breasted mergansers. The snow doesn't often last long, and soon life is back to routine, the familiar pattern governed by the tide sweeping in twice a day. Three men on the Exe. A fisherman, a pilot, a gardener. In half a century, they have seen some changes. Fishing isn't what it was.
I've enjoyed it, but I think if I had boys, I should have put them to a trade, and then if I'd wanted to come back to it after that, well, that would have been up to them. But I wouldn't advise anybody to go fishing now, not a young chap.
Dido, too, is a little pessimistic. Where have all the herrings gone?
Before 1926, I've seen 150, 200 trawlers out there. And you'd always have anything from 30,000 herrings to 80,000 herrings of a haul. You'd catch 4,000 or 5,000 scallops a day. They went like that.
As the tide sweeps in, the birds retreat, until finally most of them are huddled together on the Warren. Dick, like the birds, takes things as they come.
You can't settle down and watch birds for a long period now without getting somebody come along and put them up. But the birds come to the estuary just the same, as much as ever they do. Well, I like it, but anyway, any old way. Oh, I've spent so long on the estuary as well, I've got attached to it in any condition, any mood at all.
In many moods, on many days, we have seen its various ways. Spring sunlight, autumn glow, summer people cannot know. Changes come fast as tide. Fish may stray, birds do bide. And so do bide such as we, upon the river and by the sea.